Joining us now is former senior CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos, former chief of operations in Europe and Eurasia, I should say, and Colin Clark, director of policy and research at the Soufan Group. So welcome both of you. Colin, how precarious is this hostage deal, giving all the players, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, extremists among the settlers in the West Bank, who are already creating problems, according to U.S. officials?
Well, it's extremely precarious. As you mentioned, Andrea, it's a multiplayer game. It's not just Hamas and the Israelis here. And those are some of the factors and variables that are going to tell us how durable, how sustainable even this short 4-day ceasefire can be. We know that Palestinian Islamic Jihad is holding hostages, and there's also been an acknowledgement that there's been some criminal elements holding hostages too, and it's unclear what leverage or control Hamas has over them. So very complicated landscape here at the moment.
Mark, what does this mean in terms of Israel's planned offensive? Because all of the officials I interview say we're not giving up on that offensive. So it's either in the next couple of days if something breaks down, or when all are out, they are determined to continue hammering southern Gaza.
So I think while, from the humanitarian perspective, we're all going to welcome the release of the hostages. And in Israel, this is a massive issue. There's a social compact, that Israel makes with the citizens. If you're taken, they're going to get you back. But from the Israeli military perspective, a 4-day pause was not a good thing. Let's just be very clear about that. And I think there's going to be growing international pressure to almost, normalize a pause and turn it into a permanent ceasefire. And Israel is certainly concerned about that. There's much more to do. While the Israeli military has been quite successful in their view in attriting Hamas, making gains in Gaza, the number of rocket attacks certainly are down. But there's much more in their mind that they have to do in the south. And I think there's going to be some concern is after this 4-day pause, which actually can turn into several additional days if more hostages are released. That's part of the deal. But what happens then? How do they turn this back on? And in the view of Israeli military planners, they are worried about this.
And Colin, you recently wrote in Politico that Hamas is not ISIS, and that comparison itself is counterproductive. Having watched the incredible video of what happened on October 7th that was pieced together by Hamas video and other GGTV footage from the kibbutz, I'm not sure what the distinction is. I saw beheadings with ISIS and I saw beheadings with Hamas, except that, if one was a clean kill, if you will, and the other was, using a hoe or an axe from a farm equipment, laboriously to kill a live person.
In terms of the lethality, you're right. In terms of the attack itself, the tactics, techniques, and procedures were indeed similar. But we have to look at the terrorist organization as a whole. This is a group that's expressed, political leanings in the past, although the Israelis aren't going to want to talk about that right now. But the TTPs and the modus operandi of a group is really just one element or one aspect to it. We watch war now on our televisions in 2023, but this isn't a Netflix series. This is a conflict that's going to be long and drawn out. And I think the Israelis would do well to start preparing for the political aspects, as unpalatable as that may seem right now.
Well, when talking to Israeli officials, they're not forgetting October 7th, even if the rest of the world has. And Mark, they are supposedly tailoring some of their tactics in terms of the ground offensive, and perhaps not using 2,000-pound dumb bombs, on refugee camps anymore. But there are real concerns in the U.S. about some of the ways that they have proceeded against the hospitals, for instance, even though the U.S. says that Hamas is under the hospitals.
Right. And we certainly have heard that the U.S. has been kind of quietly and sometimes overtly giving advice on ways to have much more pinpointed targeting. I think the U.S. intelligence community has probably provided some information and again, some expertise on this. But, there's 2 points I think that are important to make. One is that Israel does view October 7th as existential. We might not, the rest of the world might not, but Israel does. And so they are going to want to continue on. The other point, Andrew, and I think that is often forgotten as we have this debate in the United States, 30 Americans were killed in this attack. And that should bother, I think, people in the United States a bit more than it is. And, the U.S. intelligence community, U.S. law enforcement is obligated by law, we have to bring to justice those who killed our fellow citizens. And so, while we celebrate this, the humanitarian pause, and certainly with hostages coming out, there is much more to do. In my old world of counterterrorism, the idea of a permanent ceasefire is not something that is promoted in any way.
No, understood. And I wasn't going to suggest that myself, but Colin, is there a political cost here, given the humanitarian disaster that Gaza now is for civilians? Is there a political cost in the way members of the Senate, Democratic, pro-Israel members of the Senate, are turning against Israel's funding, and Europe is in the countries, turning politically? Our country.
I think, I think Netanyahu is under domestic political pressure. I think there's other levers at play here in the United States. And there's also the fact that we're continuing to support the Ukraine conflict, which I fully endorse and think that we should. In fact, I'm a bit concerned that Ukraine's totally fallen off the radar in some respects. But we're dealing with a lot right now. I think the administration gets fairly high marks for juggling all these conflicts and crises, and we're going to have to lean on our allies, and we're going to have to hope the Israelis are able to overcome some of their own domestic political challenges to see this conflict through.